We're talking about deplatforming and shadow banning and some of these other discriminatory practices that are being experienced, particularly by sex workers online. This is tied into all of the madness we've seen in the past several years around FOSTA SESTA and all of these other issues, all these other forms of discrimination. But Amberly, I have to say, when I was doing my preparation for this episode, I kept coming across different websites, different articles, different stories. And as I'm reading about these issues, trying to get a sense of things, I couldn't help but find like a half dozen articles that were quoting you. And so I figured, like, why am I doing all this research to try and understand this topic when I have like somebody who's being quoted in Rolling Stone and Cosmo magazine and all these other places on this topic? So let's do it. I mean, can you tell us the difference between deplatforming and shadow banning and kind of introduce us to these ideas?
Absolutely. So there's three kind of negative things that can happen to you when you are online on social media. The worst being deplatforming. So to define that, that would be what happened to Alex Jones, for example, where he got kicked off of PayPal, which is payment processor. I consider that a form of social. It's not social media, but it's how people get paid. So getting rid
It
of
facilitates
monetization.
social media, right? Like
Yeah.
if somebody's going to be doing this full time, they need access to Patreon, to PayPal, to
Yes.
something that's going to keep the lights on.
Exactly. 100%. So getting rid of your monetization, getting rid of, like, for example, also like Onision, which I dislike him, but he's a good example on YouTube where they got rid of his monetization, but his content is still around, unlike Alex Jones. That is also another form of deplatforming, because
Mm-hmm.
even though he still has his channels, he can't make money off of that content in the way that he had previously made money. So there's deplatforming, which is losing the ability to post content or losing monetization. Then there is shadow banning. So shadow banning started when social media sites got tired of banning someone because they are the bad, if that makes any sense. So a lot of times if they ban someone, they go and make another account, and it just becomes a whack-a-mole kind of situation. But
Sure.
if you shadow ban someone, they will spend months to years trying to figure out how to get more people to see their content, and they won't go make other accounts as frequently, so it slowed down them having to delete people. And then there is, which is a form of censorship. Um, and there's two differences. There's account shadow banning where they just don't like you as a person, or there's post shadow banning. So if you're talking about a certain topic that
Mm.
they just don't want to get traction on their platform, but they don't have anything against you, then it could just be that you're talking about something like sex, that is going to get that post shadow ban. You do that enough times, it usually leads to an account shadow ban. And then the last one is suppression. So suppression, a lot of people think they're shadow banned, which is a more extreme version. So going from deplatforming to suppression, shadow banning is a less extreme version. Suppression is a lot of times the algorithm thinks you might be a robot. They're not 100% sure you're doing robotic type things. So it's suppressing you until they can see a lot more organic type of things coming out of that account so that they
Mm-hmm.
can keep a robot kind of in check.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
yeah.
as far as I can tell, Twitter and Instagram and really every major platform denies that they practice shadow banning. I mean, do I have that piece of it right? Because I mean, there's a lot of PR speak, there's a lot of bullshit around these topics, but it also seems to be overwhelmingly the case that they're full of shit. I mean, do I have that right? What can you tell us here?
I have to be careful with what I say because I was NDA'd after speaking with Instagram's policy review team. I've also spoken with people at Twitter, and technically people at Facebook because Instagram's Facebook, but also a separate
Sure.
team from Facebook.
Right.
And their favorite term is not discrimination; it is uneven enforcement. Uh, I I have thoughts on that.
Wow.
Yeah, somebody, like, I'm not an etymologist. Like, somebody's going to have to walk me through the distinction there, but I think we kind of get it a little bit.
A
That
hundred,
is that
a
is
hundred.
positively Orwellian. Absolutely.
Let's give it a pretty name. It's kind of like I told my friend, I was like, when she was looking at possibly having to fire someone. I was like, invite them to succeed elsewhere.
Yeah. We're going to promote them to being a customer now.
Wow.
I mean, customers to anyway. Yeah. Hi. So I like to use this example because it is something that is demonstrable and was proven true. YouTube very quickly hid this, but Nerd City has a very popular YouTube channel. I highly suggest anybody go check him out. In fact, he's the person that made me start looking at this for the adult industry in general, because YouTube actually usually is ahead of the curve when it comes to censorship and what's going to happen on other social media platforms. They really follow YouTube. And when YouTube came out after Adpocalypse, which is an actual thing, if you guys want to research that, highly encourage you to if you're interested in the subject. It caused, for brevity, I'm not going to go into all of that background.
Sure.
But
I've already got some notes around a lot of these topics in the show notes for this episode, but I'll make sure to include some information on Nerd City and Adpocalypse and everything else that we're talking about here for the data geeks like me that want to dive into all of this.
Yay! Oh, thank you. That's perfect. Yeah, Nerd City, massive shout out. Love his content, and he's a huge data nerd. I call us data dogs. He's a huge data dog like me. So Nerd City discovered on YouTube after Adpocalypse went down that there was actually in the code, you could actually just view source and look in the code and see why your video was demonetized and for the exact reason. Was it sexual? Was it violent? Was it because of certain words used? He was able to actually see why, and he showed this in a video, and YouTube very quickly made it to where that stuff is hidden now. But a lot of other social media sites started doing the exact same thing. And so I checked on Twitter because I remember 3 or 4 years, no, more like 2 to 3 years back, a lot of creators in the adult industry were complaining on Twitter about shadow bans. And I was like, well, there's got to be an algorithm for this, because it's not a person going around going, adult, screw them, adult, screw them, adult, screw them. So I actually started looking at the code and I found similar. And after I published my findings, shortly afterwards, Twitter changed it. And yeah. And I showed it that it was really because of Nerd City. Like, I was like, if YouTube fucked up and showed it to people, I bet you other sites did. But yeah, that is. I forgot the original question now. Wow, good job.
It sounds like we're in such a shitty place here, and it does speak to how powerful these platforms are, that we can all sort of know and recognize that they are that they're cheating on us, that they're lying to us in a lot of ways. But also, as I say that, like, we are on YouTube, and if you're watching this video, then hopefully the signal got through. But the reality is, it feels like there is somebody with their thumb on the scale, but it's nearly impossible to really prove that or to do anything about it.
Way to get the channel banned on Amber Lee's very first show as an official host, Chris.
Yeah, seriously.
Way to go, bud.
I'm kind of dogging on him too, not gonna lie. But yeah, there's not an individual person. And I will say, having spoken to these oversight teams, the issue is it's kind of like with Twitter rolling out the super follows right now. Having asked certain questions, it's very aware that they don't even understand 2257. The problem is it's not just the adult industry. There's a bunch of others. There's gaming is being suppressed. We've got the marijuana industry being suppressed. There's a lot of different segmentations being suppressed. And it's because we don't have representation inside of these policy teams. There's no one going, hey, this is causing an issue. This one thing that you did to stop this bad actor is hurting so many other people. Maybe we should try it in this way so we get the bad actors and not catch people that we didn't mean to. But I think that that's the big thing to remember when it comes to suppression and shadow bans, is that it is an algorithm. So if you're playing into the algorithm, like for example, a lot of people are not using they're not using certain words or changing words so that the algorithm doesn't pick up on it.
I mean, we've had people tell us before that secular sexuality with like an @ sign or something similar might be more effective for us. And the truth is, it's impossible to know if that's really true. I imagine the sophistication has gotten a little bit beyond sex versus s @ sign x, but that's the type of thing that people are kind of stooping to in a lot of ways. Yeah.
I don't see that actually working for a lot of people. It worked. The problem is, by the time a lot of people start talking about something, someone in a policy team somewhere has also peeped it and caught on.
Sure.
It takes you having to do hundreds of thousands of tests. So one of the ways that it feels weird saying I'm an expert in this, but I developed robots. I have hundreds of thousands of Twitter accounts that I tweet out random things in order to test to see what I'm able to do. But you, Christy Powell of the Sexuality podcast, can't make 200 to 400 episodes of sexuality to test out to see what's going to get banned and what's not going to get banned. So, and then by the time you catch on to something that works, then some bad actor is going to grapple onto that and then make it to where it's an endless game of whack-a-mole.
Well, it sounds like there's a incredible amount of effort and ingenuity that is going into developing these practices. I don't mean to be naive here, because I know that we are all kind of used to living in a sex negative world, but what's the motivation? Why is hypothetically Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, these folks so eager to shut out voices or topics around marijuana, around sexuality, around, possibly particular political perspectives or these kinds of things? Why keep that from folks?
Disney. No? Okay, I'll continue.
I mean, I suppose I see where you're going, but walk us through it.
Advertisers. So the big problem with Adpocalypse was it used to be all ads played on all content on YouTube for the most part. And advertisers couldn't choose if their ads played next to someone or something. And a whole bunch of really big companies, like household companies like Disney, Coca-Cola, Nestle, came together and said, we're going to pull out on YouTube on the same day. And it basically was essentially an advertiser strike. They didn't call it that, but that's what it was.
Sure.
And so a lot of brands don't want their, for example, this happens in the porn industry all the time. They have, I've seen lawsuits because someone had a Budweiser logo. And by logo, I mean a can on a kitchen counter.
Yes.
Yeah, it's as simple as that kind of thing that causes issues because they don't want to be associated with porn. No one's going to think, okay, Budweiser sponsored that porn shoot. No one's going to think that, but they're that scared of it. So YouTube and Twitter, Instagram, Facebook get a lot of advertising specifically from these types of from these big sponsors. And then those big sponsors kind of get to tell them what to do. It's similar to platforms have to cow down to MasterCard and Visa, which is the next wonderful problem. MasterCard and Visa doesn't want to be associated with certain things, so they make it to where, okay, you can't have that kind of content on your site, or we can't take your payment processor, which then everyone screams Bitcoin, but as popular as Bitcoin's becoming, it's not ubiquitous, really.
Yeah, we're not quite there yet, and whether or not we should get there, I mean, that's a very complicated question to be sure. But I think this is good motivation to just be aware of
options
of what the mega corporate megaplex is leading us to.
No, yeah, exactly. And then the last thing, and this sounds kind of conspiracy theory, but there's a huge history to back it up. A lot of times, like, we're the people that make platforms get big, like sex workers. People, the reason we have the internet is because of porn. There's a freaking Avenue Q song about it.
VHS before that. Porn has driven innovation in nearly every industry if you want to dig deep enough.
Exactly. Like the first still photos were, well, not like the very first ones, but the ones that like really made people want to learn how to like get this done faster. Porn, art. There's a, wasn't it Pornhub or something that was recently showing like all the dirty like painted stuff from museums. They were curating dirty old, what was it called, classic porn. And then there's like the Whores of Yore. Twitter also highlights this as well. Porn really pushes everything. So what will happen is when these platforms are smaller, all of a sudden a bunch of sex workers discover it, because usually when something's small, they don't have a ton of rules. We can post our stuff. We can bring our audience there. It grows. It gets more and more and more popular. And then all of a sudden advertising starts coming in. Monetization comes in. We start getting suppressed. We start getting pushed off. If we look at OnlyFans is known for porn, but I dare you to check out their Instagram. I dare you to check out their Twitter. I dare you to look at who they promote. They promote chefs. They promote yoga instructors.
I was just gonna say, I saw a YouTube video the other day, and it was an OnlyFans person making like a stir fry or something, and I'm like, are you kidding me? Nobody's watching OnlyFans to see cooking videos.
Yeah,
now, man.
They want to be the next Patreon, and it's like, that's great, and there's a lot of money in vanilla, but like, are you going to honor those who created you?
Right.
I hope, but I have, yeah.
Hey, let me posit another hypothesis for you, Amberly. I want to hear what you think about it, because I'm hearing you guys talk about shadow banning. And it seems to me there's a lot of parallels between this and lazy parenting. You know, like they don't want to do the work of moderation, right? They don't want to actually have to pay people to go in and analyze this content to see what might not be offensive, or, like you were saying, what might not be appropriate for each individual advertiser. So it seems to me like it's just they don't want to pay the money to actually have it done professionally and effectively, which, again, we're talking about large corporations, and we all know that large corporations, Amazon, don't really like to pay their people fairly, right? So what do you think about that?
So it's not a conspiracy theory, and Nerd City actually went on to prove this. When it comes to the moderation of most content, and this goes for all social media, not just YouTube, there are different data centers across I want to say data centers, but there's different centers across the globe, which makes sense, because what may be more offensive to an American audience may not be as offensive to a German audience. So you want somebody from like there's universal stuff we don't want on platforms, obviously, but it does make sense that like if this content is going to be more popular in India, maybe suppress it in other places, but like let it be pushed more in India because that's their culture, so on and so forth. But the problem is some of these data centers, they're not even some, all of them don't look at just the content and information that is being reported to them when it does go to human review, because stuff does go to human review, not as much as you would like for it to when it comes to suppression and
I kind of feel like it's not nearly enough.
It's not.
That's kind of what I'm getting at, yeah.
But what makes it worse is, imagine me, and this happens a lot in the BBW sphere. You have someone who the computers, the algorithms determined that I have more skin showing than the average person should because I'm bigger, but I can be fully very well covered up, but it's going to make it think that I'm naked. So I then send it to human review. I'm American. I'm wearing a tank top. Then it gets sent to a Afghanistan or Pakistani center, and one of those people that have a different, or even if it just goes further into the Bible Belt in like Alabama or something like that, they review it and then they're like, yep, nope, shadow ban, even though it doesn't actually violate the terms of service, just because they didn't like it.
It's like a failure of localization, really, is kind of what you're saying.
It's a mixture of that, but also it pairs well with what you're saying as well. You have a platform, and I work for a platform in the adult industry, just for pure like transparency. I work for Adult Empire, and we go through everything that's posted. A human goes through every single thing that's posted. Yeah, it's going to cost more in labor, but it makes it to where you have a better platform. And yes, you're going to have people you're going to have to device ban people. You're going to have people that are going to keep making accounts and stuff like that. But I don't think that making it to where we just put in more automation is going to fix the problem. The problem is really going to be that, if you guys have a bad actor, why aren't you turning that person into the FBI for harassment? Like,
that's what I'm saying. Yeah. Lazy parenting, right? They don't want to actually do the moderation. They don't want to leave themselves open for repercussions. They don't want to be accused of harassment. They don't want to face some litigious YouTuber with 3 million subscribers or something. So they're just like, well, you know what? Instead of actually doing something, what we're actually going to do is make it so that their videos don't pop up on anyone's feed. And we'll just hope that they don't notice.
100%.
I mean, admittedly, these companies are trying to appease some very confusing stakeholders, because they have been tasked after FOSTA SESTA and some of these other concerns with the something of a responsibility to keep things, under control. And they've become responsible for the things that are being posted on their sites. But also, our government is not particularly interested in making like common sense legislation and helping to craft rules that are reasonable and easy to follow. Our government is interested in propping up politicians that can say that they are tough on crime and that they are tough on sex trafficking, and they're able to like villainize and demonize sex work and other aspects or other industries like marijuana, the war on drugs, and all of these kinds of topics in order to get votes and to stay in office. Nothing about this capitalistic government democracy system is really conducive to like a thoughtful consideration of what is and is not appropriate content. Is there a solution here, Amberly? I mean, what would you hope that people or that these corporations might do differently?
Citizens United.
Citizens
Just
United.
saying, maybe limit the amount of money that corporations can buy politicians with might be a start.
Yeah, that feels like an important piece.
Yeah, 100% Citizens United. And also, like, as someone who is obsessed with machine learning, I absolutely love it. I love having more automated processes in my business. I love simplifying my life. We need to force companies to have more human review. We need to have companies stop trying to be lazy and write algorithms that are going to harm different, like, I hate to say this because I'm also very pro business, if that makes sense. Like my business, if I don't want you on my platform, if I don't want sexual based content on my platform, I should have that right. But once a company gets so big, once you put yourself, like, I hate to say this, but we need to regulate the social media industry. Because once you become social media, it should be that social. You can't tell me what types of conversations I can and cannot have when this is the way most people are actually deciding to get their news now, if that makes sense, and educate themselves.
Yeah, it ceases to be private ownership and it becomes a utility.
Yeah,
that's, I think what we're more moving towards is social media as a public utility.
And if you would have asked me like 6 months ago, I would have called myself crazy right now. I would have said, no, no, we don't want regulation. Like I'd rather have less regulation than more. I'm very Texan in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, even just writing up the rundown for this episode, I felt myself feeling a little conspiracy theory-ish. Like it definitely is a maddening, confusing aspect of the internet, and that's becoming a more and more significant part of our world.
100%.
Yeah, but there is such a thing in capitalist societies as market failure, where there are certain segments of society that have just demonstrated that they're incapable of being run for profit, right? Prisons, healthcare, schools, like there are things that we need to regulate. I agree. I'm Canadian. I'm not American. So, I'm not on the same page as you Texans. But, we are a fiercely individualistic people as well, but we've had this system in place where we have a single payer healthcare system and it works great. I mean, I'm not aware of any country that's had a single payer healthcare system where it's actually failed, but I can show you quite a few where it didn't work. I can just look down south. My mother just got out from a 6-week hospital stay, and I was talking to another ACA person about what the costs might have been. And we're talking like 6-7 figures, right? Like there are some things in our society that we need to have regulation for. And I kind of am leaning towards social media being one of them. What do you guys think?
Yeah, no, I don't foresee another way of being able to do it, because social media is how more and more, like, the elections, I think, proved it. That's really what sealed the deal for me. People are being elected based off of social media at this point in time. So when you have politicians being chosen based off of social media presence and stuff, that kind of changes the dynamic. It goes from cute cat memes to very impactful in someone's life. And when you can just silence a side or eliminate the competition, like, I'm sorry, but I don't want to live in a puritanical world. Wow, that's a word.
We're making up words today. I already made up one, so that's
that's part and parcel of the work here. I mean, even a concept like shadow banning would be almost impossible to have explained to a time traveler, not just from 100 years ago, but even as recently as 10 or 20 years ago. That notion would be very, very different. This is all coming at us so quickly. And so I guess I'm curious how sex workers are adapting to this marketplace. I mean, I know that it's basically common practice at this point, if you're on Twitter, if you're on Instagram, to have multiple accounts, so that when one gets shut down temporarily or permanently, that you can quickly switch over. What other solutions are there?
I suggest everybody have their own website and direct people to that site, because then it's not someone looking for you in a place that can be taken away from you or taken away as easily. And honestly, in the adult industry, we're used to this. Like, we stay on a platform until they basically kick us off, and then we find the next platform. We blow it up. We make it really popular. I mean, look what happened with Tumblr. They kicked us off.
I was going to say, Tumblr is your example for that. It feels like OnlyFans is, 5 years away from kicking off all of the sexual-based content. I mean, that's a prediction, but how realistic or unrealistic does that sound to you?
I'm really hopeful, because they keep saying that they're not going to, but like, you don't promote us, you don't really push us, and yet every article that's ever written about you is about us. Yeah. So it just, I would say, if I was just looking at strictly facts and the stuff that's only facts, I would say, the probability that they'll kick off sex workers is very, very high. At some point, because it's going to make more sense for them, especially since they're trying to attract bigger singers and YouTubers and people who have contracts where they can't be on a platform with sexual content. So
that feels like a huge part of the problem to me. And I don't know that there's a solution to this notion. Hopefully secular sexuality is part of that solution, but so long as we're living in a sex negative world where Disney and Budweiser don't want to be associated with sexuality in any kind of meaningful way. Like, yeah, we want hot chicks in bikinis running up and down the beach with, splashing beer all over each other, but we don't actually want sexuality in our general daily lives. Like, we have made that such a shameful, such a private type of practice. And I think so much the worse for it. Are there solutions here? I mean, what should we be hopeful for?
So I like to tell people, stay on the platforms that you can, adapt as you can. Like, for example, one of the best things that you can do is more organic posting. A lot of people resort to trying to use, like, scheduling stuff that you type out yourself is fine, but like auto posts, like as soon as I publish on this site, it'll go live here, here, and here. Schedule more of that stuff, so that you don't then at least have also the added impact of looking like a robot. I know it's more of a pain in the butt, but it's worth it. Constantly look for new sites that are out of there. Like, for example, 3 years ago, I was at a conference where I mentioned TikTok, and literally half of the people at my panel went, "What's TikTok?" Now, TikTok has a lot of sex workers on it. So constantly look for new social media avenues, because when they're newer,
I just want to comment really quickly. I think a couple hundred people just sort of scratched their head and went, "Wait a second, there's sex on TikTok?" Now I've got my search terms.
You've just literally flooded their servers, and TikTok is going to crash within the next 45 minutes, Christy.
I'm not that sorry.
Speaking of crashing servers, crash our servers, folks. Give us a call. We have open lines, 512-991-9242 or tiny.cc/callsex. And Christy, I wanted to touch on something you mentioned a minute ago.
Yeah.
With the Tumblr thing, right? You were saying that you think it's about 5 years away for OnlyFans. I don't think it's 5 years away. Like, what indications did Tumblr give before they blindsided their community with the no sex rule? Not really very much.
I might pass that back to Amberly, but to my mind, the thing that caused that was directly tied to Fosta Sesta, and it was very much like, yeah, they might have been headed in that direction anyway. Yeah, they might have been sort of poised for it. And then there was, I don't want to say an excuse, but like sort of a panicked reaction to this new piece of legislation that then set the tone for how everybody interpreted that legislation. And I know we've covered Fosta Sesta several times on this show before, and it would encourage anybody who's not familiar to read up a little bit. But Amberly, correct me where I'm wrong here. The super short version of the story is that piece of legislation effectively made social media and other platforms responsible for the things that their members were posting with regards to anything that could potentially be related to or cause sex trafficking. Now, certainly, there's a lot of details to get into there. We can talk all day about why that legislation was passed, what the motivation was, what the motivation that they presented was versus what it actually was. I mean, there's a lot there, but in my mind, I can't help but feel like we are somewhat due for another really shitty piece of legislation. I mean, we've talked to Alice Little a couple of months ago about a couple of things, and there are some things working their way up up Capitol Hill right now. And, if we weren't in the middle of this pandemic, I can't help but feel like we would have already seen something really shitty come in and try to deplatform sex workers. Amberly, do I have it right in your mind?
Yeah, so 110%. There's a lot of things in the works that look like they're going to be coming down, that are going to make it to where there's going to be more pressure on the platforms. What Fosta Sesta exceptionally, like, summary of it. It put more pressure on platforms to ensure that people are not talking. I can't send Christy a message and try to set up like an escorting call or whatever like that. It would actually make it to where that would fall back onto the platform and they could be responsible for it. Mm-hmm. So after the Pornhub expo, air quotes for podcast listeners, expose about there being a ton of inappropriate content on Pornhub, which again, like I think they found something like 12 or 24, which is, I like to say 25 to more than there should have been.
Sure. Meanwhile, but still infinitesimal considering the scope of their yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, like Facebook has, I think, 257,000. I'm pretty sure that's close to the number of how many were reported in the last year. So of the same type of content, and they did next to nothing to really stop it. Whereas I have a hard time with Pornhub, like reporting stuff to them and it taking more than 10 minutes for them to remove it.
Sure.
So anyways, going back to in response to that New York Times article that came out, that was just absolutely so many pieces wrong with it. There was a couple of legislators that got together over that weekend. They thought it was just this huge thing that they had to do, and they drafted this bill that luckily enough of us were able to call them and tell them what they're actually, and this shows you the panicked nature that this stuff is causing, even in our in our political stratosphere. They actually wrote a piece of legislation that they were probably going to get passed because it's for sex trafficking, most likely would have. And it absolutely would have, this would have deplatformed all sex workers, truth be told. It said that they were going to change the age of consent, the age of joining into the adult industry, being able to shoot porn, to the age of consent. In California, that's 10 if both parents agree to it.
Yeah.
So we had to call them and say, you are actually changing the age of joining the adult industry.
Creating a problem. In your bullshit attempt to prevent one. Yeah.
And there was other stuff in there. Like they said, we have to have a 1-800 number that's manned 24/7 for people to call to report it, images and stuff like that. We have to immediately take them down within an hour. And any piece of content that is uploaded to any type of site has to be monitored before it's posted. That would kill so many small companies. Like, again, Amazon can afford this. Facebook can most likely afford this. I'm even willing to say Twitter can afford this. Google can afford this. But that means that, honestly, it would create such a monopoly that I'm not saying the 1-800 number, fine. I'll give you that. Take it. That's fine. We can have that.
Sure.
But it would have made it to where most sites would just deplatform anything that is not cuddly teddy bears.
Yeah, and it's the companies that can afford it that are kind of the cause of this entire problem to begin with.
Exactly. No, 110%. Luckily, again, we were able to stop that one, but there's similar bills being proposed that are just making it to where, for example, in order to access an adult website, someone has to send me their driver's license and I have to create an account for them. Who wants there to be a log of every piece of porn they've ever consumed out there? Who wants that? Nobody does.
I mean, I'm kind of the type of data nerd that's always like, man, if I could just find that one thing from that one night when I was drunk. But I take your point, like to have that log accessible to the government. Like I can appreciate why people are anxious here. And yeah, man, this is such tricky territory, and I want to be really mindful of it. But Amberly, you and I talked about this a little bit with Sin Sage in an episode that I'm deeply proud of, and definitely encourage folks who didn't catch to take a look. I'm gonna make sure to have links to that as well. But the reality is, like you said, even 25 videos is 25 too many. But these are kind of problems that are somewhat non-existent. You know, any person who is being sex trafficked, any person who is being sold into sexual slavery, any human being that is being assaulted in these ways, that's a despicable and disgusting act. However, we are being really lied to on a grandiose scale about the scope of that problem, and it's being used as a bludgeon to decimate healthy human sexuality and to other a huge segment of our population in some really awful ways.
No, 110%. And again, like, it's so I love the word infinitesimal. It's so infinitesimal in the adult industry for something. We're pretty good at self-policing, and we're pretty good at adjusting. For example, mini-vids and Pornhub now, if you're a performer that doesn't want your video up, even though you signed a contract and said that, and they can provide the contract saying that you did it, they're getting to the point now, because of Sesta Fosta and all of this, Visa, MasterCard stuff that's happening, where they're taking down content just because the performer complained, even though they consented and signed a contract before performing on it. So, like, the adult industry is willing to make adjustments, if that makes any sense. Which I think is a problem in and of itself, because of course I do believe if you signed a contract, you should honor it, all this other good stuff. But it does show you how it's not, we're ignoring something. We're not dumping this on someone else. So suppressing us, shadow banning us, deplatforming us isn't actually going to get to the bad actors that people are claiming that they're trying to go after.
Fair to say. Well, this is obviously really heavy and complicated material. I am just so appreciative, and I feel so lucky that we have you, Amberly, to walk us through some of this information.